When you think of a farm, you probably think of Old MacDonald, right? Cows, pigs, chickens. And the unidentified sounds that send shivers down your spine in the dead of night. If you're a fan of scary stories, then you'll definitely enjoy the following farm horror stories. And if you really want to scratch that scary story itch, be sure to watch until the end of this video for a truly horrifying account that will haunt your dreams. This happened to me way back in 2002, just after I turned 18. For reference, my birthday is in January, middle of summer. To clarify, I went to my uncle's farm just outside of Coaster in the Free State, South Africa. My mom thought it would be a nice getaway as a late birthday gift, so she picked me up from school on a Friday and we just drove through. It's just over a 2-hour drive, so we got there about 5 p.m. By the time we greeted everybody and got settled in, it had already started to get dark. But I went down to the stalls to see my horses anyway. It was always my first stop whenever we got there. These days when we visit, I don't go anywhere alone. I went straight to Gabriel's stall. He was my 4-year-old stallion at the time. Black as ink and my absolute favorite. He reminded me of the horse in Black Beauty. He walked over and pressed his muzzle into my hand, and I stroked him. The whole time I was just talking to him gently, but suddenly, and without any warning or provocation, he reared up and started kicking at the stall door. I fell backwards, and I was totally startled. He was always such a gentle horse, and this was completely out of character for him. The other horses, there were about 6 total, I think. They started going crazy. Even through all the noise they were making, I could still hear the other animals around going completely nuts. I had no idea why this was happening, and I started to freak out. I was sitting on the floor up against a wooden post, with my hands over my ears. I was crying my eyes out. I was paralyzed with fear. Then I felt a hand on my shoulder. I felt the blood drain from my face, and I thought I was going to throw up. Instead, I just screamed, and I mean like a banshee. It was all just too much, and I passed out. I must not have been out long because when I came to, one of the farm workers was holding me in her arms while singing a gentle song to me in Sesotho. I didn't understand the lyrics, but it was very soothing. She wiped my tears away and asked if I was okay. What struck me immediately was just how quiet everything had become. None of the animals were freaking out anymore. I asked her what had happened, and she held her finger to her lips. She looked at her husband, who was standing close by, and I saw that he had a sjambok in his hand. My mom and uncle were just outside the door, speaking in hushed voices. I looked back at her, and when she looked at me, I saw fear in her eyes. Now that scared me, because she was always such a fearless woman. She told me that it was the tokolosh, and that it was running around scaring the animals. I grew up hearing stories about this demonic little creature, and my mom had always told me that it's just an urban legend or whatever. But at that moment, her face made me doubt that. Later, my uncle said that I shouldn't listen to old wives' tales and that the tokolosh doesn't exist. Fair enough, but what scared the animals so badly then? So I'm 22 and a bit of a nerd. I tend to really enjoy playing all kinds of horror-related video games during my downtime. It's mostly single-player games, so that makes me a bit of a loner, I guess. I'm also studying game development so that I can eventually create my own games. Anyway, my story begins on campus. I'm studying at the University of Pretoria. That's where I met Shanae. She seemed like a really nice girl, and we immediately clicked. She's also into horror. Games, movies, books, series, and more. And it's the more part where things started going wrong. Last week she asked me if I wanted to go and explore some abandoned farmhouse. Sounded cool. Apparently she came across it while she was hiking. At the moment, it's still warm in the evenings since autumn is only just now starting to creep in. I agreed since I thought that it might give me some inspiration for a future game idea. She asked me to pick her up on campus. While driving to the farmhouse, I started to feel really uncomfortable, like something was off. Against my better judgment, I shook the feeling off and just kept driving. It felt like we were driving forever. until eventually she told me to turn off onto a dirt road. Red lights were starting to flash in my head now, but I ignored it, thinking that it was just my nerves. We were out in the middle of nowhere, and it was absolutely pitch black outside. We drove for about another 10 minutes, then came to a rusty old farm gate. She jumped out to open the gate, and then we drove for about another 5 minutes. That's when I saw the house. It was an old white Dutch colonial-style house, really run down. I parked the car facing the house and switched off the engine and the headlights. Now we were in total darkness. The white of the house was almost glowing in the darkness like some ghost. My heart was racing when we got out of the car. We turned on our flashlights and started walking towards the house. Suddenly, we heard branches breaking somewhere close by. But when we looked, there was nothing there. I was starting to feel more anxious by the minute. We made it up the steps and tried the door. It was unlocked, and it swung open with this horrible creaking noise. I mean, straight out of a horror film. I went in first, but then I heard a gasping sound, and I turned around. Shawnee was gone. I ran back outside to look for her, but when I turned my flashlight towards my car, a man was standing there with a gun in his hand. He looked like he had been living in that farmhouse for ages, and there was severe hatred in his eyes. That's when the unthinkable happened. From behind him, Shawnee stepped out. I'd been set up. I knew I was in danger. I aimed my flashlight straight into their eyes and then took off running. I've never ran so fast in my life. I could hear them coming after me, so I dropped my flashlight and hid in the bushes. When I could no longer hear them, I somehow managed to make my way back to the main road. Eventually, a trucker gave me a lift back to Pretoria. I haven't been back to campus since. I'm too scared to even leave the house now. I'm 31 years old, and I've been working at a farm near the wildlife rehabilitation in Alajuela for about 10 years. Alajuela is a town in Costa Rica, by the way. Anyway, so this happened in the middle of January when one of the tigers escaped their enclosure, which is not too far from the farm. Social media spread the news fast, and since we were very close to the place, everyone at our farm was on high alert and decided not to take the horses out on their daily runs until the tiger was caught. Obviously, we didn't want the tiger to attack the horses. Many of the horses are also boarded at our stalls, and so we take great pride in caring for these horses. I also live in my own garden cottage on the farm, so I can tend to the horses at night if anything comes up. Me and one of the stall hands were bringing all the horses in from the pastures, and the horses seemed a little restless, which made me restless as well. Anyone who knows anything about horses knows that they have an uncanny ability to sense danger. We've actually caught a few criminals on the property because of this. Horses are highly intelligent animals. So we were busy taking them into their individual stalls, and they grew more restless by the minute. We had our hands full with the last few because they were being very uncooperative. When all of them were in, I told the stall hand that he could go and that I would put all the blankets on the horses. The wind had started to pick up, and I was thinking that maybe they were just restless because a storm was headed our way. But I was wrong. Really wrong. After I had blanketed all the horses, I started walking back home. I wasn't very far from my cottage when I heard this low, rumbling sound. I'd never heard anything like it in my entire life. There was also the smell of popcorn, which I found really weird. The sound made me stop in my tracks, and my immediate thought was that it was the tiger. I didn't know what to do since tigers are not indigenous to the area. Do I walk slowly? Do I run? I was completely terrified. Instinct kicked in and I ran like crazy. All I could hear was my blood pounding in my ears, and all I could see was my front door. I got in the house as fast as I could, and just as I swung around to slam the door shut behind me, I saw the most horrific thing I have ever seen in my life. Suspended in midair was the tiger, making a leap at me. Claws out, teeth bared. I thought, well, that's it, I'm done. Time just stopped. It was weird. Next thing I knew, I was slamming the door shut just as the beast slammed into it. I was shaking all over. When I called the farm owner, my voice was shaking so badly that he could barely understand a word I was saying. They searched the farm almost immediately after the incident, but the tiger was nowhere to be found. As far as I know, it was never found. Anywhere. If you thought these stories were scary, then make sure you watch this next video here if you really want to be scared.